Hello, and welcome to the Godless Bitches podcast. I'm your host, Beth Presswood, here with Tracie Harris.
Hey.
And our guest, Teresa MacBain.
Hey.
Godless Bitches is a podcast of the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational group dedicated to the separation of church and state and the promotion of positive atheism. The ACA also sponsors the Atheist Experience TV show and podcast and the Nonprofits podcast. You can contact GB using gbpodcast@yahoo.com. Or, bitches at atheist-community.com. So, we have a guest here today, Teresa MacBain, who used to be a minister. She is a graduate of the Clergy Project. So, Teresa, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well today. Thank you.
Good. So, you are a graduate of the Clergy Project. So, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
The Clergy Project is a group it's about a year old, and it was started based on a conversation between Linda Lascola, Dan Barker, Dan Dennett, and Richard Dawkins. They just had some concern about clergy folks like myself who had lost their faith and wanted to create a way for them to contact and communicate with other people that were in the same situation. So this online community, very secure, very safe place was created where we log in under a false name and are able to communicate with other ministers who are struggling with the same things with similar issues.
Great. And Jerry DeWitt was he the first graduate of the Clergy Project?
Yeah, he, I think October, November, he was the first one of us to come out. There've been a couple others. I'm actually the first female.
Awesome. And yeah, he's now over Recovering Religion. That group, I think,
has come out. So Jerry calls me his sister since we're the first. He's the first man. Maybe he should call us Adam and Eve. I don't know.
Well, that's extremely encouraging. And for everyone out there, you should listen to the Living After Faith podcast, where they actually have the audio of Teresa coming out. You came out at the American Atheist Convention, correct?
That's right. On Monday, the last day of the convention, I was given the chance to come out and to share about the Clergy Project.
Awesome. It's extremely moving, so everyone should go listen to that. So, my first question, I grew up extreme Southern Baptist, super fundamentalist, and have barely know anything about more moderate or liberal strains of Christianity. So, what kind of denomination has a woman pastor, and how do you deal with what the Bible says?
Well, let me back up just a minute. I grew up the same way you did. I was a strict Southern Baptist fundamentalist. Say that 5 times fast. And as I was working through my questions, I didn't realize this was happening, but looking back, I can see it. I moved into more progressive modes of Christianity. So Methodist Church is one of the more liberal churches. I have to admit, in Florida, it's conservative in some things, but they do allow women as pastors and have for about the last 50 years. As for the justification for it scripturally, I think that they just kind of work around the Bible verses a little bit and pull a few instances, like Romans chapter 16:1. Paul writes to Phoebe, who is a leader in the church, and the word that's used in the Greek, it actually could be just a leader, Bible study leader of some sort, or it could be a pastor. So they use the interpretation that it's pastor. And there's a few others, like Priscilla and in the Old Testament, Deborah, and just a few others. So, that's enough grounds for them to offer ordination to women.
Interesting. Well, I just had to get that out of the way because that was my hugest question. So do tell us about, how you grew up and how did you enter the ministry?
when I was a little bitty girl, my dad was a pastor. I can remember vividly coming home one Sunday night and telling my dad, I must have been 5 years old, that when I grow up, I want to be a preacher just like you. And of course, I was told, no, girls can't do that. Mm-hmm. But girls can be choir directors, girls can be missionaries, can teach Christian schools, these different things that were allowed. And so that's what I did, basically. I set out on my little mission to find a way that as a woman I could serve in ministry. My family was very musical, so that seemed to be the perfect fit for me for years. I just worked in music ministry. Eventually, after college, I found out that I was a pretty good teacher. Well, during college, I found out I was a pretty good teacher, and so that was my education, and I went into teaching in Christian schools, conservative Christian schools. As I worked my way through questions dealing basically with biblical contradictions, and I still had that thought in the back of my mind that I really like to help people. I really like to be a part of change, and just remembered that when I was a little girl, I felt like I was supposed to be a pastor. Mm-hmm. And that led me to a lot of questioning, a lot of soul searching, and reading other denominations, especially the Methodist Church, that allowed women to be pastors. And I was actually doing music in a Methodist church for one of their programs. I was the worship leader, and I met a lady who was going through the process to become a Methodist pastor. And she and I became friends, and she would talk to me about ministry and just say, "You're perfect for this. I feel like this is what God has called you to do. Why don't you go talk to somebody about becoming a Methodist pastor?" And I kind of put her off for a little while, and then finally decided, maybe she's right. So I did, and started the process, getting the education that I needed, and working through all the stages until I was finally official and assigned to a church. And that's been 7 years ago since I accepted my first church as a senior pastor.
Mm-hmm. So you went to seminary. What kind of things do they teach there to prepare you for being a pastor?
A lot of biblical study classes, Old Testament interpretation, New Testament, preaching classes. Things that kind of would be logical. Pastoral counseling. I took extra psychology courses, preparing and leading worship, Christian history.
Mm-hmm. And obviously they weren't literal. What kind of interpretation did they have of things like miracles and, where real history kind of conflicts with Bible history? Was any of that addressed, or apologetics as well?
Yeah, it was. Methodists are not inerrants or literalists. They don't take the Bible as Southern Baptists do, word for word, thought. Every little piece is inspired by God and absolute 100%. Methodists say that God gave us the Bible to base our lives on, that it is the authority for faith and practice. That's what they say. And they gave something that I really liked because, remember, I'm questioning, and the Methodist Church is giving me permission to do this. So they have what's called the Wesleyan quadrilateral. When you approach the Bible to interpret something, you start with the Bible, whatever the scripture is. Then you look at tradition. What did the early church fathers say about it? What have other reputable scholars or biblical interpreters said about it? Then you look to your own reason. Okay, you look at history, you look at science, see how they measure up. And obviously, if, like in the creation story, it doesn't quite jive with science, so a Methodist will take science, take evolution as its thought process and belief. And then finally, you look at your own experience. What does your experience tell you? What do the experiences of other people tell you? So if you use those four things, you can really do a lot with that. And for me, it justified in my mind, okay, so the Bible's not inerrant. But it also opened a can of worms for me, because it was like, okay, well, how do I figure out exactly which ones were God spoken, which ones were considered just stories or fable or myth, or non-scriptural. Non-scriptural is not a good word for it, but just not 100%. This is the literal translation of it.
Yeah, when you open the door to all that, though, I mean, what's really left? If the Bible can't be inerrant, if it can't be literal, if science can prove it wrong, why do people still believe it? Is it just kind of it makes them feel good? Is it what is it that keeps them there believing that there is still good stuff to be had in it?
Well, for me, I know it seemed like the best of both worlds. I had my faith. I believed in God. I felt that I was called to ministry. The principles and the teachings of Christ, of course, love other people, help them in their time of distress, which is a huge part of Methodist practice. People refer to Methodists as the people that are of the social gospel, and it's meant to be kind of a slam on them, but really, for me, it was a huge compliment. It meant that we just didn't stand up and preach the Word of God and tell them to come down to the altar and say a prayer. It meant that we actually went out and had soup kitchens, and we had food pantries. We went to foreign countries and dug wells. We met the needs, physical needs of people as well. So that's a huge attraction, and that was a huge attraction for me. I could believe the Bible, I could follow the practices of Christ, but not just in theory, but in actual hands-on, tangible help for people who are struggling, which is what I always wanted to do, is help people. And for me, it was a perfect fit, and I think it is for a lot of the Methodists that were in my congregation and in other congregations as well. Mm-hmm.
That's what I see with a lot of the former preachers, Rich Lyons and Jerry DeWitt and all those guys that are just awesome too. They just really want to help people. And a lot of them, loved the counseling and things. And it just seems we need to find better ways for people to become people helpers rather than, promoting the ministry like that. So
yeah, I agree.
Eventually, I think. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
No, that's fine.
So eventually, even though you were allowed to have reason and allowed to not take the Bible literally, you grew to believe that there was no God and that this wasn't true. How did that occur?
It was a long process. A lot of steps. Some were kind of clear, and some I only recognized looking back on it. The permission to think and the permission to look to science and history and archaeology was probably one of those turning points for me. Because, you were raised in the Southern Baptist denomination, and you didn't do that. Mm-hmm. You stuck with a certain group of scholars, a certain group of Bible teachers, and a certain line of thought, and you really didn't get out of that bubble. And you didn't question or doubt, because that's a lack of faith, and a lack of faith is sin. Mm-hmm. So, being in the Methodist church, being a Methodist pastor, I started thinking and I started reading, and all those questions I'd had for those years that I'd stuffed away and not dealt with, they just started popping up, and I'd deal with them one by one. I remember driving down
Hello? Did we lose her?
A street in Tallahassee one day, thinking about just some of the books science journals, Popular Science magazine. I was thinking about, wow, the universe is really pretty intricate and pretty varied. So why in the world would God allow himself to be defined by one religion? And in that moment, I kind of just went from, okay, one God, Christianity is the only way, to thinking, okay, there's a God, but we're all trying to find him in our own way based on really how we were raised. And that was kind of the first stone that that rolled away for me, kind of to put a little spin on it there. Other things came pretty quickly after that. I thought, well, how in the world could this God torture people just because the weak, frail creatures that we are can't seem to figure everything out in this life? So just like that, I didn't believe in hell anymore. I couldn't understand a God or a divine creature or divine being or whatever you want to call it that would actually torment someone in fire for an eternity, which happens to be a pretty long time, because of something as simple as being a human being.
Mm-hmm. And so your denomination did believe in literal hell?
Yeah, that's the basic tenet of the theology. However, if you ask 40 Methodists, you'd probably get 50 answers. So.
Yeah. Tracie, feel free to jump in any time if you have questions as well.
Sure.
All right. So, and while you were having all this questioning, you were still actively pastoring and preaching a sermon every Sunday, counseling people, doing all that. And how did you do that while you were still questioning inside?
Well, here's the funny thing. All these questions, all this reading, all this researching and thinking, the whole time my thought and my mindset is, I'm going to find these answers. It's going to strengthen my faith, and I'm going to be able to help other people who are thinking these same thoughts and questioning in this same way. So that was kind of, it wasn't like I set out to say, I'm just going to tear my faith apart. I'm going to dig through it and, just shred it bit by bit. No, my intention was always to have a stronger faith and to be able, again, to help more people.
Mm-hmm. So when did you find the Clergy Project, and did you seek it out once you knew that you had lost your faith?
Yeah, last year things kind of started to congeal for me. I didn't know what a deist was, but again, looking back, I had become a deist in my beliefs, thinking there was a God. Nobody has a clue about him, yet this God still wants personal relationship with us in some form. That didn't last very long, and then I considered myself kind of a quasi-agnostic. Mm-hmm. And it was at that time I started looking for other books to read outside of the quote-unquote Christian realm. And I read a couple of books by Bart Ehrman.
Mm-hmm.
And those kind of, they confirmed a lot of things for me, but they also made more questions pop up in my head. So I guess it was probably February or March of last year, I just opened my computer and Googled pastors who are losing their faith or lost their faith, something like that. I don't even remember the exact words. And Dan Barker came up on the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
I found his book, Godless, and literally read it in one evening. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't believe there was somebody out there who actually had been through the same thing that I was going through. And I had no clue who Dan Barker was. All I knew was that he was a pastor, lost his faith, worked through it, came out, and here he was writing a book just for me, to help me. So I called FFRF, left a message, and he called me right back within an hour.
Wow.
And we talked, and he told me about this Clergy Project had just started. They were, it was invitation only at that time. There was no public site. And he said, I think you'd be a perfect fit. Would you like to be a part of it? And of course, I jumped at the chance to talk. He was the first person I'd even talked to about this. So the opportunity to have, I think there were around 40 or 50 other pastors involved at that time. The chance to be able to chat online with them and work through some of the stuff in my head was just too good to pass up.
Well, great. I think we're all glad that you jumped for that. So, I know you can't reveal too much about the Clergy Project, but it's basically a place. Now, everyone's really, really properly vetted and it's all like anonymous and confidential and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so y'all just have chat rooms and conversations and everyone's just talking about, I mean, what exactly? Losing their faith, how they're going to come out?
Yeah, on any given day, it can be a variety of things. I mean, one day we were talking about, different ones of us that have music in our background. We're just talking about what kind of music do you like? What kind of music do you like? Simple stuff like that. But then there are those deep, dark night of the soul kind of questions. I've got to get out of here. I don't know what to do. I can't find a job. I'm going to lose my insurance. My retirement is tied up in this, and I'm 55, 65 years old. What am I supposed to do? So the real deep questions, people struggling like I did. I'm in this position. I can't get out just yet. And how do I deal with myself every day, looking myself in the mirror? So those are the kinds of questions. And I want to jump back real quick and just confirm what you said. Yeah, we have a group of screeners. When a person makes an application, we never, ever solicit anybody. They have to ask us by putting in an application. And one of our screeners contacts them, and we check them out fully to make sure everything in the story is cohesive and it fits and that they're a good fit for the project. And then they're welcomed on board and become a part of it.
Right. That's certainly the kind of thing that could really go bad if, some Christian was just, well, not just Christian, but any theist was trying to just get dirt on preachers. I mean, were you ever afraid of being found out? Like, as you said, you had the book Godless. I mean, did you go in a store and buy that? Did you order it on Amazon? Were you even afraid to maybe be seen having it, or what?
Yeah, all of my non-theistic books were on my Kindle, and it was locked down tight with a password. I never had an actual physical book of anybody's. It was all the virtual pages.
That's a good idea. That's good. Yeah, technology's awesome.
It is.
So you may not know what was the final straw, but when did you really say, I have to stop, I have to come out?
I'm trying to remember. It's probably been almost a month since the American Atheist Convention. It was a few weeks before that. I really was at the point of, this cannot go on. It's tearing me up inside. It's funny to me. People who are atheists, who are non-theists, are always accused of having no morals. Well, my morals, which I do have, were eating me up. Knowing that you're torn between two things, trying to work your way out and trying to not bankrupt your family at the same time. Just trying to make the right moral decision. So I had been continuing on. I always made sure that everything that I preached, even if it wasn't what I was believing, was 100% doctrinally correct according to the Methodist doctrine, theologically correct. And a few weeks before that conference, I had decided that I couldn't go on. And just through a chance meeting with David Silverman, the opportunity to speak at the conference came up, and I knew that was my doorway. I knew it was my time. I knew it would be something that would help the Clergy Project, and by doing it, we'd get exposure just like I'm doing right now, and I'd be able to share about it and just to open people's eyes about what's really going on and what the struggle is.
Mm-hmm. And so what has happened since you've come out?
A lot.
Yeah.
I came home Tuesday. I think I flew home, and by Wednesday, the local news had already picked it up. The video, an amateur video that was made at the conference, was getting thousands of hits on YouTube.
Wow.
Yeah. I didn't expect that. I figured I'd have at least a few days.
That must have been pretty shocking.
Yeah, before I even had a chance to call my family. and was tired from the conference weekend. And so I had to kind of backtrack and call them. And most of them were understandably angry that the first they heard of it was from a YouTube video. So I kind of had to try to work through that. And then, of course, it's in the local news here. Tallahassee's not a huge town, but it is very religiously conservative. So the television piece got, I don't remember, enormous amount of hits, positive and negative. And the negative ones were really negative, which for somebody who's been a pastor and a people person and a people pleaser, that really kind of sent me in a good little downward spiral, and I just stayed in the house. I didn't want to go to the grocery store or go anywhere where I might accidentally run into somebody that I knew.
Mm-hmm. And
it's interesting that you mentioned the idea that, some people were put off by not knowing this or finding out in a way other than, I guess, you telling them.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me, there's like a couple of things that reminds me of. We often get letters from people who are completely uncomfortable coming out to their families. And I'm always kind of stunned at the idea of, I mean, on the one hand, I can understand how sometimes it's comforting to talk to somebody who's really removed from a situation. But on the other hand, I think your family is supposed to be providing that environment where you can go for comfort and support when you need it.
Yeah.
And so for me, when a young person writes to us and says, I don't know what to do, I don't want to keep living a lie, but I'm scared to talk to my family. That to me is like one of the most disappointing things that I could ever hear. And I think what stuns me about it is just kind of the idea of the families that I knew when I was involved in fundamentalist religion and how they would have had a very negative reaction to getting news like this from someone other than their child directly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they seem to take no blame whatsoever for creating an environment where their child is afraid to talk to them.
Exactly.
It's like they don't get that the reason the child wouldn't come to them and lied is because they made such a terrifying family environment where the kid thought that they would be rejected. And sometimes they are rejected. I mean, sometimes they're not. But the point is, these families seem completely oblivious to the fact that they create a situation where they terrify their own children and make them unable to talk to them openly about things that are important to them. It's disturbing to me.
It is.
And the unawareness, I think, is more disturbing to me than the actual fact of what they've done. Just their complete inability to comprehend what they've produced as far as a family dynamic. They think they're living in a happy family, and really they're just intimidating and frightening their children.
Yeah, and that's very true, especially if you're deeply entrenched in any kind of fundamental religion. And obviously, I speak from the Christianity perspective because that's what I was raised in and that's what I know. But any theistic religion has that same environment, offers that same kind of condemnation. I mean, thankfully, my dad and my sisters and my brother were supportive. Didn't understand, but they realized that I'm their daughter and sister, and that love transcends everything else. I know that's kind of unique and that not everybody has experienced that. Some of my other extended family I didn't have such good luck with. And I'm just giving them time to kind of work through it and hope that relationship can be mended in the future. But, that's not the way it is right now. And so it kind of remains to be seen what will happen.
Yeah, it's just stunning to me, though. There was a friend of mine, and I understand. I mean, I guess I try to understand, but I had what I consider to be a good friend when I was in high school. Like, we sat next to each other, rode the bus every day. You know what I mean? It was like the pal that you wait for them to come and you save their seat. And this was, I thought, my buddy. And it was like years out of high school that I found out kind of through the grapevine secondhand that he was gay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember thinking, he never said anything to me about it. And it made me kind of question, were we as close as I thought? And I remember, though, in my mind, I never felt like angry that he didn't confide in me, even though I felt that it kind of made me go back in time and reevaluate the relationship somewhat. The main thing I kept thinking was, what did I do to make him feel so uncomfortable toward me? Like, I kept trying to figure out, did I say things? Was I like, kind of homophobic maybe in my younger years? Like, what is it that I said or did that gave him the impression that I would be not accepting of him? And it never even occurred to me to think to be angry at him for not telling me. All I could think was, wow, did I really give out a vibe that was that, that seemed that intolerant, I guess. And it made me feel bad. It made me think to myself, did I say flippant things about, people who were gay? Or did I, is there something I did or said that was ugly that I maybe wish I hadn't, and made him feel like I would have mocked him or rejected him? Or I just felt really bad about it. And I don't even know, like I don't even know, how to get in touch with him. But it's just, to me, I wish other people would think more like that. That other people, when they hear that kind of thing, would say, would kind of second guess themselves and say, what did I do? Or, and it could just be that his own situation was such that he didn't think anybody would be accepting. It might not have been, anything specific to me, but I just can't see blaming the person.
Yeah. And then I agree with you. I was sitting here thinking of things in my past, even when I was still in the Baptist church and very fundamental. I remember different people that I would find out, and you think back to those years, anybody that wasn't a Baptist was kind of on the bad list,
Sure.
at least in the way that I was raised. And so I found out this girl that was in band with me in high school, terrific girl. I just adored her. She was a little older than me, so I kind of worshiped the ground she walked on. And I found out she was a Catholic. Well, I didn't hate her. I didn't start leaving notes on her locker that said, "You're going to die and burn in hell, and I can't wait to see it."
Right.
Which are some of the letters I've gotten.
Right.
I prayed for her. I prayed for her because that's what I believed I was supposed to do.
Sure.
Others, like you said, people that were gay and or just, even I had a friend some years ago that I found out was dating someone who was an atheist. Well, I didn't go and do all these hate crimes of sorts against this person. Again, I prayed for him. I was confused about it, but yeah, I agree with you.
The other thing that you mentioned that I noted was that idea, you were calling it like the morality that made it hard for you to, I guess, continue in a lie. I think that's probably a fair way to characterize how the letters that we get. It's interesting to me that in a lot of the letters we get, people will write and ask about how to come out. Sometimes the letters are pretty sparse, and they're just like, I don't know how to come out to my family. I'm afraid of my family, and what do I do? And we have to prompt them at that point for more information, because I'm clearly not going to advise somebody on what to do without more information. But I always point out to them that if they have a fear, I'm going to take that seriously, and I'm going to advise them to not come out as long as they're afraid of what might occur, and that they need to evaluate a little bit more what's causing that fear. Is it just nervousness? Do you feel like they'll be disappointed? Or do you really feel like there is something valid to fear? Like, will they kick you out? Will they stop paying for your college? Will they, things that would be really impactful and damage your life in some way? And one of the things I notice is that they have all this pressure sometimes to stay in the closet. So you'll have somebody who's living in a household where they know their parents are just going to go ballistic. They're like, my parents are fundamentalists. My, father is really, really strict, and I don't know what my family's going to do, but I know they're going to be really angry. I'm afraid they'll throw me out of the house, but I just got to know how can I come out? And when you prompt them, when I prompt them, I always ask them, what do you hope to gain in coming out? Like, here's what you're risking. You've just sent me the list of what you think you're risking. And now I'm asking you, what is it that you hope to gain here? And inevitably, 9 times out of 10, what they hope to gain is they don't have to live a lie.
Right.
That one pressure of I feel every day like I live a lie is sufficient to bubble up to the surface and challenge all of these real world social, familial, and potentially financial and, security concerns and fears. I don't think sometimes that people understand what they do, and this goes kind of in hand with what we were talking about earlier about the family situation being fearful. I don't think these parents understand. It's like, on the one hand, you've created an environment where your kid can't talk to you, but that's not the worst that you've done. You've created an environment where your child is so scared to talk to you that they're also now living in a situation where there's this weird mental torture almost, where the kid walks around being completely unhappy to the point that they're willing to risk whatever wrath you've threatened or implied in order to be able to just say, this is me. And I think part of that, especially for the young people that write in, and I'm just, go out on a limb here, I think a lot of that comes from the idea that it's, for a young person, it's extremely painful to think that your parents don't accept you. That the people who have bore you and nurtured you and raised you and been the one thing that you've been able to rely on in your life, that those people, if they knew who you really were, would reject you, I think is extremely frightening, and it's a lot of pressure to put on a child. And I think that these people parent out of fear, in intimidation, because they think that if you it's sort of like the biblical image of God, that sort of strong, tough love idea, where it's just like, if my kid does this, I would throw them out. I would disown them. I would shun them. Shunning is like a big thing in the Bible. You shun the people so that they'll eventually see the light and come back and do the right thing. And so rejecting people is actually effective because we're social creatures. And when your whole community rejects you, that's extremely tough for a social animal to endure. The more entrenched you are in that community, the harder it becomes. And when it's your own family and your own parents and you're a young person, I think that's very horrible. It's torturous to do to your child. And when someone does that, and I see the child basically saying that what they really want is to honestly be able to say who they are. And I think where that comes from is a place of that kid wanting the parents to love them regardless. Yeah. I think they want mom and dad to recognize they're an atheist and accept them anyway. And unfortunately, there's no way to control those other people. So you can't guarantee that. It's like, if your parents were humans, they would love you regardless of what you believe. But I can't guarantee they're going to behave like decent humans. And they may reject you. And it's painful to be rejected by your mom and dad.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I can't imagine going through what I've gone through as a teenager and living in the home and in the environment. It's not just the home, it's the whole environment. And honestly, that's where I was coming out as well. For 44 years, I've lived one single way of life, one lifestyle. My entire world was wrapped up in church and ministry. Sure. All my friends were from churches. All my colleagues, of course, pastors, ministers, choir directors, worship leaders, education, everything. So right. I found myself, the atheist community has been so incredible. I have more friends online that I've ever had.
I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, it's so terrific. All I have to do is just tweet that I'm a little down, or I'm having a rough time, or I'm getting more hate mail, and immediately I'll have 100 responses. Hang in there. We love you. We got your back. Don't worry about it. But losing that, risking it, and then losing so much, is the hardest thing, really. And to be 15 or 16 and do that or face that, I just don't think I could have. I don't think I could have come out at that age.
Well, yeah, some of them really can't and shouldn't. Not until they're older and more stable, like on their own.
Yeah.
I'll say that I think it takes a special kind of bravery to come out when you're older, when you've gotten so established. Like, I mean, you lost your job and all the stuff that comes with that, and you're having to start like a whole new career. A young person can afford, to a certain extent, they might lose their parents, but they don't have to throw away a career. They generally don't have, kids or, a spouse or anything like that they're going to have to, that they might lose or anything. I think it's a lot harder on some of the older people and the older pastors for sure. Yeah,
it's being at midlife and really just walking away from all that. It's scary. There's some folks in Florida. I mean, I really want to give a shout out to some people, the Humanists of Florida. About 5 or 6 have pitched together and made donations and given gifts to our family, financial gifts, that have taken that piece, at least for a few months, of stress off of us, which is one of the things we really hope to do with the Clergy Project. We're working really hard right now to establish that arm that will take it from being just a virtual world to this tangible relief, offering assistance with retraining, reemployment, and then a short-term little financial stimulus of sorts, so that at least those parts of coming out will be easier, a little bit easier. I mean, all the other stuff is still going to exist. You still have the risk of family, friends, complete strangers that you've never met or don't know at all hating you. But, it shouldn't be that financial reasons, job reasons should never be the reason why you have to stay in hiding, in my opinion.
And are they taking donations now for that at the Clergy Project?
We are just about ready to do that. As you know, everything that deals with money takes a lot of paperwork for the government. So if folks would like to be a part of that, if they'll just keep an eye on our Clergy Project website, which is clergyproject.org, it won't be much longer. Like I said, there's a group of us, 10 or 12, we're working every day on it. So as soon as we get all our ducks in a row, we'll be ready.
All right, so there's the Clergy Project website. Anything else you want to pimp? Your Twitter or anything?
Yeah, you're welcome to follow me on Twitter. It is just my name, Teresa MacBain, and that's M-A-C. My husband is Scottish. My Facebook is the same thing. If you want to log on and be a friend, just Google or search me on Facebook, Teresa MacBain, and you should be able to find me.
All right. So what do you think the future holds for you? What kind of employment do you think you'll do after this? And do you have any speaking engagements or anything else going on?
Yeah, I've actually got, and I think that's going to be my employment at least for the near future. I have a speaking engagement this coming weekend for the Humanists of Florida. I've got about one a month throughout the end of the year, and I just got another invite a few days ago to go to Pennsylvania. I will be speaking at the American Atheist Convention in Austin next year.
Woo!
Wow.
Yeah, so I'll be down in your neck of the woods.
Very cool.
Yeah, and just that's kind of where we are right now. Since I am unemployed, I'm kind of the de facto spokesperson for the Clergy Project, and so that's kind of my motivation to get out and just share my story, but share about the Clergy Project and kind of drum up some support, bring some awareness, and of course eventually raise some funds for that and provide for my family at the same time. So hey, I'm not asking for much, am I?
Well, if anybody wants to get you to their group, they can contact you. So, do you know how any of your former parishioners or church people you were over are taking this?
I've heard from 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
And each of them, well, 3 of them, I mean, they don't understand, but they've given a response that I would hope that every religious person would give, and that's a response of tolerance. Said, hey, we don't understand why you believe the way you believe, but you're our friend, and we want to keep it that way. So that has been very positive. I have another friend, and she's supported and offered her encouragement, and I think that the big thing for her was that she felt just felt hurt that I didn't trust her enough to talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, I mean, how do you do that? This is your parishioner. This is your church member. I need to have a private moment with you in my office. I'll sit down. I need to just share with you that I no longer believe. I've lost my faith. But I'm your pastor. So, I don't know. Maybe if we'd have gone out and had about a half dozen margaritas, that might have happened. But
oh, yeah, Methodists can drink, can't they?
Yeah, we can. That's a cool thing.
So that's just weird to me. So I don't know what else I want to ask. Probably a lot of. Go ahead, Tracie.
I have a question. I've got like a double-sided question, I guess. I know that it's like there's one part of it, and then I guess the opposite question would apply too, which is on our email list, we often get what I would call like themes. Mm-hmm. So every now and then we get like an odd letter, but most of the time the letters that we get fall into certain categories where you can kind of say, oh, it's one of these, or it's a question about that, and it's kind of these common themes that we see often. And I was just curious about, like, just from a general perspective, what kind of themes do you get at the Clergy Project that you would consider, like, a common thing that we hear is fill in the blank? And on the inverse of that, I'm wondering, what are some of the more bizarre or extreme things you might have heard that if you can share them without giving any kind of detail that might, betray a confidence?
I think most of them are pretty similar in the fact that, at least for all the actives, there's 2 groups of people that are part of the Clergy Project. They're active ministers who are in the pulpit still trying to work their way out, which is what I was coming in and what I was up until a few weeks ago. Then once you're out, or you come in as a retired person, or you came out, like Rich Lyons came out many years before the Clergy Project ever existed, you're an alumnus. And so the balance kind of is supposed to be that those of us who are out and have worked through it and gone through all this stuff that I'm going through right now, we can...
Hello? Oh, we're having some Skype issues.
Okay, so she went to a question mark. I was going to say she'd come back pretty quickly the couple times I'd heard it fade. The call show's still going.
All right, I'm going to stop this and get her back.
Okay.
Okay, GB is back. We had some Skype issues, so go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, I think the main themes that kind of run through the Clergy Project, and this is going to be very general description because I would never ever threaten anybody and their confidentiality, but mainly the themes kind of run along these lines. The actives, there'll be a theme of just their desperation. It's almost Sunday and I have to do this again. I can't make it. I can't do it again. I'm at the end of my rope. And so everyone gathers around that person, so to speak, and encourages them. Then there's a theme of, I'm living this double life. I hate myself. How do I work through this? And again, we come and we support each other. There's another theme of family issues. A lot of times, and then with a lot of the actives, their spouse doesn't share their beliefs. and it goes from one level to the other. My husband doesn't share my beliefs, but he feels that our relationship is strong enough, and his love for me isn't based on whether I believe like he does. So I'm really lucky in that aspect. There are others who can't even share with their spouse because they know that it would be disastrous, that they would lose them. So this family issue is a constant theme as well. And then there's the theme of those who are just about ready to come out. What steps do I need to take? Have I got everything in order? And am I going to be able to do this and go through all the hatred, all the criticism, and just the disaster that kind of surrounds it? I mean, that's the only word you can use. So those are the basic themes that kind of run through the threads.
Okay. And what about, have you heard anything that was like kind of way off the beaten path? Where it was like, wow, I hadn't heard that before.
I don't think so.
Okay, so they're all pretty similar stories.
Yeah.
But there are some non-Christians on there, aren't there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. We have, especially in the last month or so, our reach has really extended to a new group of non-theists. Some that were rabbis. And of course, there's Methodists, Baptists, Pentecostals, Catholics, all the general denominations there. We've also reached in, they've reached out to us from the Muslim faith, a couple of imams. And this last week, I think, a couple of Mormon bishops.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
that's got to be hard.
Yeah, it's definitely... It's the word is really getting out, and I'm just so excited about that. I knew that there were hundreds, if not thousands more, just like me, just like everybody else, that were struggling and that really needed this kind of support because they'd lost their faith, and we're seeing that.
Awesome. So is it pretty evenly split between the denominations? Like, I know Rich and Jerry are both Pentecostal.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Dan Barker was in the Pentecostal movement. I think it's pretty even. I mean, we have a fair number of Baptists, a fair Methodists, not quite as many that were in the Catholic Church, although I will say we have some that are former nuns.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great ladies.
So not even just, preachers, but, any sort of religious person.
Yeah, if they served in ministry, is either, like we have worship pastors, of course, associate pastors, senior pastors, executive pastor, priests, nuns, the church leadership flavor. Yeah, we have a pretty good variety of folks.
Any, preachers' wives whose husbands still believe?
No, because the scope of the Clergy Project is narrow as far as for people who are in ministry. If we have a pastor's wife, we normally refer them over to Jerry DeWitt in Recovering from Religion. I do have a blog, The Agnostic Pastor, and I have had several pastors' wives who no longer believe, but their husbands do, that have contacted me privately through email, and I've had extensive conversations with them.
Wow.
But, that's something that we've just been talking about as well, is some type of family support. I don't know how that's going to go or what direction it's going to be in, but, there have been conversations about it.
Cool. Well, I have a bunch of questions just about being a preacher and Methodist theology and stuff that might be boring for some of the listeners, but I don't care. So, what was your routine as a pastor? Like, I know I've heard some people be like, well, he just preaches on Sunday or whatever. So, could you maybe talk us through the week of a pastor?
Yeah, I'll start with Monday. I like to have Monday off. Sunday is a long day. The church I served had 2 worship services, so I was there usually 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning and didn't go home till 1 or 2. And that's 100% full on meeting people, preaching, standing up, walking around, singing, just the full emotional buy-in for me, which is exhausting. So Monday is a day off. I try not to do anything, sleep late, drink coffee, go for a run, play my guitar, do whatever it is that I want to do, or do nothing, whichever happens to fit me for that day. But then Tuesday starts, and I start making phone calls about mid-morning, catching up with people, checking in on people. Wednesdays I'll make visits. If there's a hospital emergency, if people are in the hospital, if there's a funeral or anything like that, of course that kind of has to be put in there as well, and it can't be scheduled. Tuesday I also start thinking in my mind where I'm going to be on Sunday as far as a sermon goes. If there's any kind of special worship element that I want to include, then that's my job to kind of plan it out. And I always like to have a lot of variety, so there would be drama, skits, thematic elements within the sanctuary. Like one year I did an Easter series that was on the journey of Christ to the cross, and so every week I wanted to add a different piece. Like first week I put all these rocks everywhere, and then I added just other little things that would indicate you're on a journey, like a backpack or hiking shoes or different things like that, until finally on Easter Sunday there were white flowers everywhere, candles everywhere, just light and white and flowers. So all of that had to be kind of thought out, and I had to start on it on Tuesday. By Thursday, I needed to have something written down or I was going to be in trouble on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Friday, finish up any phone calls, follow-up visits, anything like that. Get to the hard work of writing out. I would normally do a manuscript first, break it into an outline, and then commit most of it to memory. I never like to preach with notes. And then I had to create a PowerPoint slideshow for the service. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I did all that work.
Yeah.
Yeah, get the slideshow together, get it sent over, make sure everything for the bulletin, the announcements, newsletter, if it was time for the newsletter, all those things were checked in. Check over all the details for worship leaders, choir director, nursery workers, everything. Make sure everybody's on target, and we're not going to have anybody out that I don't know about. So just kind of do all the administrative stuff, and then hopefully on Saturday I can relax with my husband. But a lot of times that didn't work out either, just for emergency or, church plans, special events on Saturdays like cookouts, or, we adopted a highway and our food pantry was held on a Saturday. So a lot of times Saturday would be a work day as well. And that brings us back around to Sunday.
Yeah. I know she talked about doing funerals and stuff. There's a big push for weddings, that there are more secular people needed to do weddings. Do you still have the authority vested in you by the state to do weddings?
Yeah, I do.
Well, that might be something you could get into.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Any person that's looking for something secular, give me a buzz, send me a message. Florida is actually fairly liberal when it comes to that. All you have to do is be a justice of the peace, which means you get your notary public license and you can perform a wedding legally. So I still have that.
Very, very cool. Here in Texas, we have common law marriage, so it doesn't even technically matter. But me and Matt got married by Aaron Ra.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. Who has the Universal Life Church internet ordination thing, which, since all you have to do to be married in Texas is say that you're married, it kind of didn't even matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's how it is in Alabama, too, which I was born and raised in Alabama.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm from Tennessee, so, not much better there.
Are you a Volunteers fan?
Yeah, in as much as I'm any kind of fan. Are you a Bama fan?
No, Auburn.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Just as bad.
Yeah. Hey, you got to go one way, and in the South, football is big, so.
Well, we've got UT Austin over here, which I am told is the real UT. Not the fake UT in Tennessee. So, I don't know. The burnt orange, I look very good in. So
you look, yeah. See, I look good in the navy blue for Auburn. So
I cannot believe I actually talked about football on one of these podcasts.
Hey, if you're from the South, that's part of that's just in your blood. It has to be.
Unlike Texas, where no one cares about football.
Oh. Yeah. I don't know. We're in Austin. Nobody cares about football in Austin.
No?
Well, Austin is very liberal in the middle of Texas. The university's here, but I'd say most of the football fans aren't here, not the diehards.
Maybe I need to move to Austin.
Oh, unless you have a kid in high school. Or unless
high
you're
school
a
football.
Cowboys fan.
Oh, yeah, my husband
You
is.
should totally move to Austin. It's awesome.
I should. I think I would love it. My husband would love it. He's always wanted to live in Texas. My sons, I have a 22-year-old and a 24-year-old. And my youngest son is in the Army in El Paso. Mm-hmm. Which I went to see him, and coming from Florida, where it's very green and very humid and beautiful flowers everywhere, and went to El Paso, where it's dirt and rocks. I had a little bit of culture shock.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, there's no mountains here either, and there's mountains in Tennessee, and there's no cold, no anything.
Yeah, that's
there are blue
Florida.
bonnets. Blue bonnets are kind of pretty. That's about
It's not Florida.
That's okay. Tallahassee is blistering hot, and humid.
Well, it's dry here. It's a lot dry.
I miss the beaches and the springs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This time of year is gorgeous. But I'm thinking dry, not humid. Yeah, I'm thinking that sounds like a good place for me.
Yep. You'd probably love it. Well,
yeah.
I don't even know what we were getting on, but it's okay. We can talk about anything on this podcast. So what did the Methodists think about gays?
That's a huge point of division, and in some ways it's kind of like the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. Mm-hmm. Our general conference 4 years ago, I guess, and I think it was in Texas actually, in Fort Worth, the vote came up, and it was presented at the general conference to allow, not allow ordination, but just to allow an inclusion of lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgendered, and it was voted down. I think it only missed passing by about 24 votes. So in June this year, General Conference will be in here in Tampa, and it will definitely come up again, and I don't know which way they're going to go with it. But
how many votes total were there, just to give some context?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it doesn't have to be exact.
When
you say 24 votes, I mean, how many votes would you think?
I think I'm accurate saying there's between 200 and 400 delegates.
Okay. So it's in the hundreds.
Yeah, it's just a very, very narrow majority. So, I don't know what they're going to do. I would love to see them be more inclusive. I don't know if it's going to happen. The conservative branch of the Methodist Church is pretty powerful.
Yeah, I know a Methodist preacher, and he is very anti-gay, very anti-choice, just very, very everything. I don't even think he likes women preachers. I don't know if he's like some shoot-off from Methodist or what, but...
No, it actually is more common than you'd think. In Tallahassee, in this area where I'm at, there are 3 churches that will allow women as their pastors. So I served in one. Another one, the lady that's the pastor, actually, she planted that church. She founded it and built it. and then the other one is in an African American area. And African Americans haven't had a problem for years and years and years with female ministers. So it kind of limits where you can go. So the conservative part of the Methodist Church, especially in the South, is pretty prevalent.
I like how they vote on it, like that, actually changes what the Bible says. Or, I mean, was it bad 50 years ago and now it's okay? Or just because they voted on it, They can do it. I mean, they can make an amendment, and if the amendment passes, then that becomes the Methodist doctrine.
I think, too, that a lot of times you have to remember that not every church considers the Bible like the only authority or final authority. I mean, it's like even the Catholic Church is a great example. They produced it, and yet they don't look at it as like an ultimate authority. They've got like the papacy, and the Bible is fine, but it's like it worked into their overall dynamic, but it isn't really the final ultimate authority on anything.
Right.
And other churches have different views as well as to how the Bible fits in. Not everybody sees it as like an ultimate authority. Sometimes they see it just as like some sort of guidance, and sometimes they see it as a record of things. And it's not always as authoritative as it is in the fundamentalist churches.
So moral relativism.
It has to do with your view of authority. So in other words, if the Pope is the authority, then the Bible can be like a authority, like a bishop might be an authority, but ultimately the Pope is the final authority. So if you have a church where there are other forms of authority that challenge biblical authority or that can override that, and the Bible is not considered to be like the final authority or an ultimate authority, I mean, you can call it relative, but really what it is it's just saying this thing over here is more authoritative.
Well, but if they change, if they say the final authority says this, and then, however many years later they say, I mean, do they say, oh, we got it wrong, or how do they explain that?
Okay, I see what you're asking.
Well, it's not, it just changes. I mean, for the Methodist Church.
I think they just see it as dynamic.
Yeah, you can call it evolution, you can call it whatever you want to, but they just changed it.
Like what Teresa was explaining earlier was that idea that you're allowed to use like these other types of information and work that into the worldview. And so if you're allowed to incorporate science and that's one of your authorities, then yes, as science changes and information changes, then you can change to adapt to that authority.
Yeah, exactly. And even within fundamental Christian denominations, there's not an agreement. I mean, take, for example, Southern Baptist. Southern Baptist believes that a person is saved when they make a public confession of their faith, that's the salvation, and then they're baptized afterwards. Now, you take a different brand of fundamental Christianity, like the the Church of Christ.
Right.
They believe that, okay, yeah, you've made your confession, but if you're not baptized immediately, then you're not saved. If you happen to die within the 5 seconds between when you make your profession and when you're baptized, then, I'm sorry, you didn't make it.
Yeah, I think in line with what Beth is talking about, though, that both those churches probably would rely on scriptural support for those doctrines. It would just be a disagreement about the interpretation of those scriptures.
Right,
because
true.
There's certainly scriptures to support you're saved when you make that confession, and then there's other scriptures that seem to indicate that baptism is a requirement. Yeah. And so it really depends on what you're looking at and how you're looking at it. But when but like the Church of Christ, for example, regardless of the reality of whether or not you can go back and see if they have evolved, they would say that this never changes. That it's in stone in the Bible, and it will never change because that book will never change, and that interpretation is correct.
Right.
And so for them, it's like a solid, stagnated truth that is unchanging. Whereas if in the tradition you described when you first came on and we're talking about the Methodist doctrines and how they derive them and how people look at that, and you were saying, well, you're allowed to incorporate your own interpretations of things. You're allowed to look at your own experience. You're allowed to look at science. And if it negates something in the Bible, well, then you can't deny reality in light of this book. And so you would go with what is demonstrated as reality. And you just maintain, you have this faith in God, and you have some reverence for this book, but it's not like your ultimate authority. And that would be the difference.
Right.
And it's a little tough when you come from a background that has that, the Bible is the word of God, and it's inerrant, and it's this is what it says, and this is correct. And it's very hard to see how someone can incorporated in a way that's less than that. But I think further what Beth was saying is that if you're incorporating these views about religion and you have a doctrine of salvation of some sort, which I think that's pretty much mainstream Christian orthodoxy to some degree. There's like these doctrines of salvation. And so how do you derive, like, what does God require of you? Like, how do you achieve your salvation if you can't ever know what it is God wants from you? And I think that's what Beth is asking, is like, how do you get there from it changes?
Yes, exactly.
Obviously, I wasn't able to do it.
Good answer.
Yeah.
I guess you just have to kind of live in a state where, okay, this is what we believe. Oh, it changed. Okay, so I'll just change with it.
Right. And then the question becomes, did all those people that didn't know this before, were their immortal souls in danger somehow? Or is it the idea that, like, I know the Church of Christ, for all their surety of interpretation, they really have these core things that are just sort of like their hang-ups, where it's like, no, this you have to. It has to. It's like a necessary item. And then you have all this other stuff that people can debate about. And it's kind of funny because the individuals still have that necessary kind of attitude where it's like, to them, this is correct and everyone else is wrong. And yet somebody else will be just as sure that they're correct and everyone else is wrong. And so the church kind of says, well, but that's because this is one of those issues where the Bible's not that clear because your salvation doesn't rest on this issue. So This is like matter that doesn't concern your salvation. How many angels can, dance on the head of a pin isn't going to make or break you getting into heaven. So you can argue about that all day, but you can't argue about you got to be baptized because you got to be baptized.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, they're sort of like that, and they have all kinds of fluidity in reality with anything outside of their requirements.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you're saying, because that's what the Methodist Church holds to. I mean, it has Scripture, of course, but the other documents or the other authorities that you would say are things such as the Book of Discipline. That's the Constitution of sorts that can be amended. The Book of Discipline, they have another document called the General Rules, and that's just basically how a church is organized and how they carry out their business. They also include John Wesley's sermons and his commentary, his expository notes. So all those things are maybe not given equal value, but in reality they are.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. And it does make for a difficult way, especially for the average layperson, to kind of know exactly what to follow. And so they do, what a majority of people do. They follow what the preacher says on Sunday.
And so you really have a lot of authority over these people. I mean, they believe, their soul could be in jeopardy if they don't do what you say or listen to you or...
Yeah. I mean, it's...
That has to be very weird.
It does. For me, it kind of put a lot of pressure because I wanted to make sure, and I think it kind of played into a lot of my guilt over the last several months. But it really kind of was a humbling experience for me, and it also put some pressure because I wanted to make sure the things that I said, the way I lived my life, the way I took care of the people and administrated the church.
Have we lost her again?
I don't know.
Ah, crap. Hey, everybody, we're back after a little technical difficulty. Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, I was just talking about the pressure that a pastor experiences because the people, the congregation, look to that pastor to be a visible representation of God. And so really, it's been called living your life in a fishbowl. I mean, and it really feels that way. You're kind of trapped knowing that everybody's watching you, everybody's thinking about you, everybody, after church on Sunday, they're dissecting what you've said. And for a lot of people, and this is just a broad generalization, they're not involved in personal Bible study for themselves. They simply come to church, hear what the preacher says, and says, oh, okay, so this is what I'm supposed to do. And that's what they take as the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting to me. I mean, I wouldn't compare it to what I do at, on TAE or with ACA and the volunteer work there, but I remember somebody approaching me and saying something about me being in atheist leadership. And I said, no, I'm not in atheist leadership. And they were, talking about my role with TAE. And I said, I'm not in leadership with TAE. I have nothing to do with like decision making or anything like that with the show. I'm merely a co-host and I answer questions on the phone. And they were talking about, anybody that's involved in leadership in any way. And don't I volunteer with I was like, yes, I volunteer with ACA. I'm not in leadership. I'm not on the board. I'm not, there's some people that are hosts that are on the board that are involved in leadership at ACA. I'm not one of them. I do not lead the atheist community in any way.
Yeah.
And I kind of, I guess, recoil at that role. Not necessarily the roles that people step up to serve. Like, for example, I know Matt as president of ACA, he's serving the community, and I get that, and I appreciate that. But I think when people look at it more as like personal leadership, it weirds me out a little bit. Mm-hmm. I don't like it at all, and I don't like the idea of people leading or following in that framework. Idea of tell me what to do, tell me what to think. And when exactly. I get that, I still get that sometimes in the atheist community. And I don't, it's like I almost don't even know how to respond to it because it's kind of like the opposite of what I'm trying to do.
Exactly. And that's kind of my pet peeve. And, this statement may be appropriate or it may not be appropriate for some people, but my position is if you will think for yourself, if you will do your own research, dig for yourself, don't rely on what Richard Dawkins says or T.D. Jakes or Billy Graham or whomever. Find out what it is that you think and where you are, and then live that way. And if that leads you to be an agnostic or an atheist or a free thinker, great. That's wonderful. And in my opinion, probably that's where you'll wind up. But if it doesn't, and you remain in whatever faith or religious group you are, at least you've thought for yourself and you've come to those conclusions without a pastor telling you, or some other leader.
I sometimes wonder if there's a relationship between atheists who deconvert from fundamentalism and that attitude of authoritarian understanding of life. I don't know how else to describe it, but there's just some people, and that sometimes I run into this when I do run into it in the atheist community, and I see somebody with that mindset where it's almost like I hesitate to call it worshipful. Yeah. But I've had people say things like they're starstruck and I'm thinking, why?
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't understand it, and I hope I never understand it. And I hope that the people who experience it get over it. Because there is no reason to feel that way. There is no reason to be looking up to somebody in that way. There's a big difference between appreciating what somebody does in service and being, I guess, bowled over by the person in some way. I don't know how to describe it because it's hard for me to understand it. But it's different than just admiration for a job well done, or admiration for I like what you do, or you really helped me out with this or that. I mean, that I understand. I think that's quite normal.
Yeah, but when you cross over into that hero worship, I don't want to be in that place. That's way too high of an expectation for me to live up to. I'm just going to disappoint you.
Yeah, I will. I'll tell you that right off the bat. And the other thing is, though, this is what I'm trying to save people from.
Exactly.
I'm not trying to get them out of this to come and do something I want them to do. I'm not trying to get them to come and listen to me instead of listen to this person over here. I just want to get them away from the person telling them what to do, not so someone else can tell them what to do, but so that they can have their life back.
You mean you're not trying to start a Godless Bitches cult, Tracie? I thought that was what this was.
I'll join. I love you.
Yeah, I don't like that whole idea though of hanging on somebody's words.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we won't hang on your words, Tracie.
Thank you.
What did you say? I can't remember.
She even talking.
All right, well, we are coming up on about an hour and a half, and Skype will probably go out again. So I'd love to have you back on sometime, Teresa. Let us know how you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything else you want to say, your Twitter or whatever you want to pimp?
Just thank you guys. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I hope the folks that listen don't think we're all nuts or crazy, or maybe they will. I don't know. Either way, follow me on Twitter at Teresa, Teresa MacBain, MacBain. Follow me on there. I might have something worth listening to. Who knows? Maybe not. And check out, clergyproject.org if you want some more information, if you know somebody in the ministry.
And be watching for that donation thing to come live.
Yes, please. We want to save a few preachers in the good way.
Yeah.
Be sure to put that on Facebook or whatever, and I'll Facebook it as well, and we'll get the word out there when it starts.
Okay,
yeah, absolutely.
I will. I definitely will.
All right. Well, this is Godless Bitches signing out. Remember, bitches at atheist-community.com. Or is it .org? Crap.
I was about to ask. I
think it's .org. All right. So goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank
great
you.
to have you on.